The HBCU All Stars have released their national women's basketball watch list of 2024, and Fayetteville State feels they deserve a home tournament game. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. And are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? If that's the case, then the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, and Armada are the cars for you. Go find your next big adventure and check them all out at nissanusa.com. Today's episode is all about the ladies. We are solely focused on women's basketball, capping it off with a look at a devastating loss for North Carolina A&T. Prior to that, a big-time victory for Fayetteville State because they now won a tournament home game after winning the CIAA tournament. And we kick it off with an all-star list, and this is via HBCU All Stars. And when I had Travis L. Williams on the show 2 weeks ago, I asked him specifically, when are the women going to get involved in this game? And he hit me with a real vague answer. We're working. That's about all he said. Hey, we're working. We always thinking about the women. We working. And I'll be honest with you. At that point, I noticed how vague the answer was. I wasn't sure if it was vague in the sense that he didn't want to give out too much information, or if it was vague in the sense that he really didn't have an answer and he just threw some cliche, just, hey, we're working with nothing really on it. I wasn't sure which one that it was. And it turns out that it was the former. It was the fact that they had something in the plans and you see it. Now, I could take credit to say it got pushed out, but I wouldn't do that. They clearly took their time, and this wasn't a 2-week action. Instead, this was him saying, we have something on the way for women's basketball specifically. I should say it that way. We have something on the way for women's basketball, but I can't announce it just yet. I wish you would have announced it, but this is the first of hopefully a couple of steps towards having women's basketball be more involved in the HBCU All-Star experience. But let's get into this list because it's a bunch of players who have no more eligibility after this year. And I'll kick it off with Zay Green. Why not? Because most basketball conversations, women's basketball conversations I want to have, they start off with Zay Green. But this was particularly interesting because I thought that because she sat out all last year, that she would have one more year of eligibility. But clearly that's not the case. And she's just somebody who does everything. If you haven't heard when I've spoke about her every day, then you're missing out on a player who can score the ball exceptionally, somebody who can rebound the ball, somebody who can facilitate the ball, gets a good amount of steals. This is the type of player that you're missing out on, but they're highlighting her. And it brings me to her competition, Ariana Grizzle, the best scorer in the SWAC. And I think that these two will fight it out for Offensive Player of the Year. They're the top two scorers. I don't know if Zay gets the bump because her team is more successful. Maybe she does. Time will tell. But Grizzle is a player who has been exceptional from three, shot a little bit under 100 3-pointers this year. And despite being under that 100 attempt threshold, I should say, I'm going to lump her in with some of the ones who have shot over 100. She still has the best 3-point shooting percentage in the SWAC. And I think that those two are fighting it out for Offensive Player of the Year. Meanwhile, Angel Jackson has Defensive Player of the Year locked up. She has the most blocks. She was averaging 2.7. I believe that's before this last game. Because this is recorded, or the stats haven't been put in for Jackson State versus PV. They did win that game, of course. But Angel Jackson leads the conference in blocks. That's likely not going to change despite whatever happens on Monday's action. You'll probably wake up Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, and Angel Jackson will still be the leader in blocks in the conference. But she's a defensive presence on the team that she's probably the one star, the one person who just has a super high ranking amongst her peers, being first in blocks, top 10 in rebounds. There's no one else on Jackson State who can say that. She is kind of like the star of that squad in 2024. Now let's go to the other conference. You got the MEAC, and it's not a lot of players here. There's only 2 players on the list who are from the MEAC. I named 3 from the SWAC, but I just named 3. There's a lot more. And I don't say this to insult the MEAC. And I understand that I got this flag behind me that you may think, okay, I want to speak SWAC supremacy, but it's more so the fact that think about the talent that is coming in and staying in the MEAC as long as they don't transfer out. When you look at North Carolina Central, they have Kamara Burks on here, and she's the 3rd leading scorer on that team. Like, it just speaks volumes. You look at, there's no Diamond Johnson on this list. She's coming back for Norfolk State. Like, there's great players. There's mid-major of the year players on this list or in that conference that aren't on this list. Talent is returning to the MEAC, and I'm excited for that. Then you also have Ayanna Warren, who she comes in with a career high points for Howard. Let's get into some of these to the independent, and then also a player from this SIAC, and then also the CIAA. But you have Grayson Kerr I want to start with the independent, and that is Sanaa St. Andre from Tennessee State, 4-time newcomer of the year, makes the list. You have Grayson Kerr out of Kentucky State, easy choice, leads the SIAC in points and assists, easily one of, if not the most lethal offensive weapon in that conference, got Offensive Player of the Year. And then you also have Nyla Bryant, who she is a part of the Fayetteville State Broncos, who are your champions. And I'm about to speak about their team in just a second. So I thought it was fitting for me to close this episode when looking at that, or close this segment, I should say, looking at that. You have a Nyla Bryant, and probably her best moment, her crown jewel, is going 11 of 11 from the field in the CIAA semifinals, scoring 31 points. And she ended up being the tournament MVP. She was the conference player of the year, right? Like, this is a player who is well decorated on a very successful team, and a team that is looking for an NCAA tournament home game on the Division II standings. And we'll look at why they feel like they're determined, or they're deserving, I should say, why Fayetteville State believes they're deserving of having a home game in the tournament as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. And are you the kind of driver who feels like they want a new adventure, who feels like they want to push every single activity, every single adventure a little bit further than the last one? If so, then I have a couple of vehicles that are right for you. And we'll kick it off with the Nissan Rogue, which is perfect for the city drives and also for the great escapes. No more having to update your phone. Just go ahead and get in this car. And it has the Google kind of built-in receiver, has the assistant, maps, all at Google Play Store, all of those things. And you don't even have to worry about your phone connecting with it. It's just that simple. So go to the 2024 Nissan Rogue as the midsize crossover of your dreams. But then also, let's look at the Pathfinder, because the Pathfinder comes in with expansive cargo and 284 horsepower and 6,000 pounds towing. It's for any and everything. If you like the Rogue, the Pathfinder, and maybe even the Armada, then go to nissanusa.com to explore all of these vehicles. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked on Sports Today, the first of its kind 24/7 sports network on YouTube with live programming. So make sure you're checking that out. We looked at the players to watch, and that's just some of them. If you want to see the whole list, go to HBCU All Stars website. But we ended off on Nyla Bryant. And she is a Fayetteville State Lady Bronco, your CIAA 2024 champions. And they feel as if they deserve a home game in the Division II March Madness. That's what they feel like. So Fayetteville State had both their men's and women's team in the CIAA finals, but only the women were able to come up victorious. And they won their 5th conference championship of their program history, won their 2nd conference championship of the last 4 years, but this one is a little bit different. This one is you finally get to go play in the tournament, because in 2020, they didn't have that option. The option to go in and say, yeah, I'm going to have a tournament game. No, you're not, because the whole world went down the drain, and we went into the pandemic, and then we went into what was it called when you first went in? Lockdown, shutdown? I don't know, man. God, it's been so long. But basically, like the bubble type situation. And you just didn't, that just didn't fit for college athletics. Most collegiate athletes or athletic programs weren't ready to deal with that. So, no NCAA tournament. So now you got 4 years later, and you're looking at Fayetteville State, who has won the CIAA yet again. And they have an argument on why they should be hosting an NCAA tournament game this year. So let's get into it. The Lady Broncos are 27-2 on the season. And beyond just that record, they feel like if you break down how they accumulated those 27 wins, and then also there's 2 losses, that'll show why they deserve to be a host of a conference game. Yes, 27-2 is great. It looks phenomenal. Like that speaks for itself. But let's talk a little more. Let's elaborate, because now that they get to play in postseason play, they said, let's go ahead and bring it back to Fayetteville, North Carolina. And this is Coach Brown. This is what he had to say, the coach of the year, by the way, what he had to say about his team. He said a lot of teams that we played are now regionally ranked nationally, and we beat them. So we have a strong strength of schedule, and we played top teams, or we have played top ranked teams. And I hope the selection committee looks into that so we can possibly host a region. Okay, cool. Now this is me speaking. The only thing that I think could hurt them is, as I'm going through their record, through their schedule, it appears that there was only one top 25 matchup at the point of playing. And I think that could be a little bit of a problem. Depends on how the committee looks. I think that it brings up the interesting question that I see in college football every year. I don't have my ear to the college basketball streets like that, but with college football, you see this conversation when speaking about resumes and teams of that nature. Do we value where the team ended up, the opponent? Do we value where the opponent ended or where the opponent was when they played? Because you have teams who are in the top 10 who they leave. You know, like they leave and they don't come back. They end up being 22. Well, do you treat them like the number 7 team in the nation, which they were at that time? Or do you treat them as the 22nd ranked team in the nation? Or maybe they fall unranked. It's just an interesting conversation. And now Fayetteville State kind of finds themselves in that ballpark, feeling like, hey, this is what these teams came to be, and we defeated them. We deserve a nod for beating teams of that caliber. And it's hard to disagree with it, but then it's legitimately, to me, a cup of tea. That's what it is. It's whatever your cup of tea is, then that's what you will prefer. So let's keep pushing here. He wanted to look at the losses, because he's talking about the wins. Look at what we did in the wins. We beat these top ranked teams. We did this, that, and the third. But then you look at the losses. And he said, I quote, "We went 27-2 this year. We lost down in Lander, and they're a top 8 team in their region on a buzzer beater. And we lost to Johnson C. Smith when the whole team had the flu for the most part. We hope that they take that stuff into account because, of course, we always planned to go undefeated this whole year, but it was just unfortunate circumstances. I hope they look into our strength of schedule, especially our first 9 games that we played. They were tough games and all away games at that. They did have a long away stretch to start the season, not quite 9 games. It was broken up here and there, but they did have a good amount of away games. Even looking in the conference play, they started off with 3 back-to-back-to-back away games. But let's look at how he contextualizes the 2 losses. When you look at how Coach Brown breaks down the 2 losses that Fayetteville State women's basketball team had, it's hard to really hold it against them, isn't it? First time you go against a team that's highly ranked. When I looked, they were 9. And you lose on a buzzer beater. Really close game, not a blowout of any sorts. That shouldn't knock you down the pedestals. Then you look at the conference loss because you only lost 2 games. Your whole team's sick. I think it's reasonable. It feels like those are 2 losses that are difficult to hold against somebody in their resume. And then overall, just when you're just looking at where they are, and this was as of February 25th. As of February 25th, Fayetteville State, and this was before the CIAA tournament, Fayetteville State was 3rd in the Atlantic region. They were 9th in the CSC poll, and then they were also 12th in the coaches poll. Them getting a conference championship should only help, if anything, right? It may just keep them the same, but it should only help their resume. I think that they get one. I don't know everything that goes into it, but I believe that they get one. So we'll look at that, and we'll see if they do get it as we continue, or as the days go on and we continue with the show. But as we push forward with today's episode, we'll be looking at North Carolina A&T women's basketball, who had a pivotal, not a pitiful, but a pivotal loss to Stony Brook, and we'll look at the impact of that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I appreciate you for always checking out FanDuel.com/locked on. But if you haven't done that yet, today is the day to go ahead and start. Go to FanDuel.com/locked on, and they're so welcoming of people who are new members that they'll give you $150 back in bonus bets when you put down a $5 winning bet. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. They have NFL draft odds. Is Caleb Williams falling out of the number 1 draft pick? Some people have concerns about the attitude. Some people have concerns about what's seen on the field. And some people just like another quarterback more. But these are the things and the rumors that you hear going into draft season. Are you willing to put some money down on it? What about the NBA, the NHL? All of these things are going. I prefer football because that's my sport. But you go ahead and check out FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. New members get $150 back in bonus bets with a $5 winning bet. As wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. North Carolina A&T women's basketball just suffered a really tough loss to Stony Brook. And with that loss also went their kind of hopes of being a number 1 seed. They could still technically get that share of the conference title, but it's very unlikely. We'll get to that in a second. First, I want to get into how they lost the game, because a big part of this loss can kind of be represented in the performance of Sharice Pittman of Stony Brook. And with her performance, it kind of tells the story of her versus North Carolina A&T. First and foremost, she dropped 30 points. Clearly, Stony Brook dropped more points. They had the more productive offense. And when you look at her 30 points, it's the same amount. It's the same amount as the 2 leading scorers for North Carolina A&T had put together. 14 and 16 individually. Put it together, you get 30, which is the same amount that Pittman had dolo. So it just shows you the difference in points, but more than just the gross difference, because that feels so lazy, right? Just to say, oh, well, she scored more than the leaders. And like it was a significant margin, but also it feels a little bit incomplete, more so than lazy. Incomplete feels is the word I would use to describe how this feels. But then also when you look at how she accumulated her points, it's not just the fact that she hit 30. How did she get to that 30? And she had 12 points from the free throw line. Sharice Pittman shot 12 of 17 from the line, and nearly half of her points came from the stripe. As a team, North Carolina A&T shot 8 of 15. So you're just looking at comparing her as an individual, 12 of 17, versus North Carolina A&T as a team, 8 of 15. She made more and she shot more than North Carolina A&T. Heck, she nearly shot as many as, or excuse me, made as many as North Carolina A&T shot. That's a drastic difference. You know, like it's not as if Stony Brook blew them away when it came to free throw attempts. It was primarily Pittman. She had 17 of the 26 attempts. So it was primarily Pittman, but still it told a story of the day. The ability to get easy buckets, the ability to get second chance buckets, the ability to rebound and facilitate was probably one thing that was pretty close, but to be able to rebound, get second chance buckets, to be able to just score, period. Those are drastic differences. And you see a lot of that in Sharice Pittman's game. She was the leader in rebounds for Stony Brook. She was really connected to so much of the success that they had in this really pivotal matchup that was supposed to decide the number 1 seed. So now that the game is over, what are North Carolina A&T's chances of getting that number 1 seed? Not great. Not great at all. I'll be honest with you. This is not something that I think it's not going to happen. I was trying to sugarcoat it and see how I was going to put it. It's not happening. Point blank, period. When you really look at what North Carolina A&T would need to happen to get the number 1 seed, I actually think it's impossible. I actually believe that it is impossible. Yeah, it's impossible for them to get the number 1 seed because in order to get a share of the regular season title, they would need Stony Brook to lose out, and then they would need to win out. And they're also currently tied with Monmouth, who is also 12-4. So they would need to win out. Stony Brook would have to lose out. And then whatever happens with Monmouth is irrelevant to the regular season title. You would then get a share. Stony Brook has Hampton on the schedule, and Hampton has not been good. They won 3 games this year. It's very unlikely that you will see a share of the regular season title. I fully expect Stony Brook to be the champions. But what about the number 1 seed? That's done. That's not even a chance. You have a minuscule. When I say minuscule, I mean I can't even see the space between my fingers minuscule. That's how small of a chance I feel like it is for you to get the share of the title. But when it comes to the number 1 seed, it's impossible. Literally, it's not a chance. That's over and done with. The best that you can ask for is the number 2 seed. Because let's say that Stony Brook loses out and you win out. You still lose that tiebreaker. But you may be thinking you're tied with Monmouth. Both of you are at 12-4 while you're looking at, or is it 11-4? I don't know. I can't remember. Both of you have 4 losses. And then you're looking at Stony Brook, who is at 2 losses. So if you both win out, Monmouth and A&T, and then Stony Brook happens to lose out, well, then who gets the number 1 seed? Maybe you're hoping that you win in a 3-way tie. You don't, because you lost to Monmouth. So now you lost to Monmouth and you lost to Stony Brook. Stony Brook beat you and they beat Monmouth. So now you're looking at Stony Brook, Monmouth, North Carolina A&T. If, and this is just if, Stony Brook loses out, Monmouth wins out, and A&T wins out. Basically, they lose any tiebreaker with Monmouth. That's head-to-head. They lose any tiebreaker with Stony Brook. That is head-to-head. Those are the things that you really need to know. So on tomorrow's episode, we'll be looking at Jackson State's absolute domination, and we'll also look at Texas Southern versus Alcorn because this is a game that's going to decide a lot. So let's go ahead and speak on the number 3 seed, probably or possibly, in the SWAC on tomorrow's episode. I'm looking forward to this a lot. In the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed, Peace.